the Great Garden Revolutions along at 7 o'clock after a Saturday update from Channel 4 News.
Are we heading for a summer of discontent, with the temperature rising among workers demanding their pay keeps up with inflation? Good evening. Thousands of protesters in central London marched to demand action on the cost of living, calling for higher wages, especially in the public sector. The government say it might just cause more inflation, but as the RMT union confirms rail and tube strikes are going ahead next week, teachers now say they might be going too later in the year.
If the government and the pay review body don't put forward a positive programme of restorative pay awards for teachers, then we will be asking our members whether they are prepared to take industrial action.
So Britain's rail network will grind to a standstill next week as 3 days of strikes go ahead across the country, while London Underground staff will also walk out on Tuesday. Union leaders said cuts to transport funding had left workers struggling with longer hours, fewer benefits and below-inflation pay rises. And there's been more pressure on the government to tackle the cost of living crisis as thousands of people joined a march through central London. Serena Barker-Singh reports.
Not deterred by an overcast London, thousands of people travelled across the country to be here.
I've travelled up from Plymouth.
I've just travelled from Sheffield.
I've travelled up from Bromley.
I've come from Abergavenny, South Wales. It's about a 4-hour journey.
Protesting against the inaction they see in tackling the cost of living crisis. Crowds dotted with placards warning of soaring inflation and a squeeze on earnings. They marched down Whitehall with a brief pause outside Downing Street. Last month's package of support announced from the Chancellor estimated £21 billion. In this crowd, at odds with stagnant wages for public sector workers.
I'm a nurse in the health service. Colleagues are leaving because they can't afford to work. Their bills are going up, they're having to pay for parking in hospitals again, and our pay is just not enough. We had a real feeling that after the pandemic things were going to get better, that we were going to be recognised, we were going to get paid properly, and it's just really taken the soul out of everyone that actually that's not going to happen, and we're going to get told yet again pay rises for others but not for public sector workers.
That discontent may linger. 3 24-hour nationwide train strikes start Tuesday and will disrupt travel, Network Rail says, for the entire week.
The strike for next week could be averted. The government are clearly trying to push them into this industrial action.
Keir Starmer today wouldn't support the rail strike. You said that you support the strike. Why do you think he can't say those words?
Well, I don't think it's about supporting strike action or not. I mean, people have the right to withdraw their labour. They have to go through a very, difficult balloting process. These are ordinary workers that have kept the country going, and I think it's time now for the government to stop grandstanding and trying to pitch the public against these workers that looked after us.
But the cost to bring wages in line with inflation, economists predict a figure north of £20 billion.
Well, most people are seeing pay cuts this year because inflation at 9% and heading towards 11% is going up more than earnings are going up. And I'm afraid, and this is where I agree with the Chancellor, we can't all be protected from that. We are poorer than we expected to be. We are an importer of energy and energy prices have gone through the roof. That makes us poorer.
But perhaps for the government, more urgent battles ahead, with 2 by-elections next week.
And so how did this get destroyed? Was it hit by a missile?
The PM, fresh from Kyiv, cancelled his trip to the Red Wall seat he's hoping will stay blue.
I sympathise very much with everybody who's facing pressures caused by the cost of living, but what I would argue is that we will get through it, Tom. We will come through on the other side strongly. Don't forget we've got virtually record low unemployment, lowest for many years, lowest youth unemployment for a long time. But what we're trying to do in the immediate period is help people.
Help not yet felt here, where today a major teachers' union threatened a mass walkout.
We're saying to the government right here, right now, that we face an emergency for the future of the teaching profession. There's a recruitment and retention crisis. Pay is a critical issue that's driving that crisis.
Bidmen and bus drivers are already striking. Criminal barristers and postal workers are set to vote on action. Clashes feel palpable, but not yet inevitable.
Serena Barker-Singh reporting. Well, earlier I spoke to the TUC General Secretary, Frances O'Grady. I asked her why people had come out to protest and what more she thinks the government could do to help workers in the face of the cost of living crisis.
I think there's a real zero-sum game here. Our economy is shrinking, and one of the reasons it's shrinking is because of a lack of demand, and that's because wages are not just being cut this year, it's over 10 years worth of stagnating pay packets, people really struggling, they don't have savings put by to get them through, and I think people are just saying enough is enough. That, you know, we can't live in a country where we have nurses and social care workers queuing up at food banks because their wages don't cover a decent standard of living. You know, we've all got families to raise. We owe it to our workmates and to our families to make sure that people are receive dignity at work, and that's what I got a very strong message from the thousands of people attending today, is that they're sticking together, they're standing up for pay justice and their rights.
The Treasury and the Bank of England, though, say that there's only so much you can do. Putting up wages, essentially, is not the way out of this, because inflation will then go up even more. So at the moment, people might just have to take the hit. Do you accept that?
I think it's nonsense. This is not the 1970s, and we've had over 10 years of people losing out on real pay increases. In fact, the TUC analysis today showed that the average worker has lost out around £20,000 if their pay had kept up with inflation. That's what they would have been earning extra over that period. So we did have real pay increases before the bankers' crash. Our economy was in a much healthier state. What won't wash is putting the blame on workers for what we know is a global energy crisis and problem. That's what's driving inflation, not a social care workers' inadequate wages.
But surely you would admit that inflation of 11% and that it could go up even higher if wages go up as well. Surely there is an issue there, and surely there's a problem if you keep putting wages up.
Look, the government itself is predicting that real wages are set to fall again this year on average. So I don't think anybody can heap the blame on working people for trying to get a decent standard of living. What they need to get to grips with is making sure that our economy doesn't continue to shrink and that we don't suck demand out of the economy, which will hinder growth for the future. And more than that, I think working people feel it's high time that we had fair growth, that everybody had a fair share of the prosperity. We've seen, city bonuses going through the roof, profits have recovered, and yet workers are expected to take the hit again. I'd like to hear more ministers talking about what's happening to pay in the boardroom rather than trying to punish workers on modest incomes who are just struggling to get by.
There are strikes set next week by the RMT. Isn't it the wrong time for a strike right now while people are getting back to normal and getting back to things?
Nobody votes for strike action lightly. It's the last resort. We'd much prefer to have negotiated settlements.
But this is essentially going to affect lower paid workers, those that have to go into the office, those that have to go and do jobs, not those who are that can work from home. So it's going to affect lower paid workers a little bit more, isn't it?
I think you'll find most lower paid workers are in fact using buses to get into work rather than the trains. But I think the key point here is that we have many low paid workers on the railways who are struggling. They're seeing their bills rise like everybody else. The food bills are going through the roof, childcare costs, and of course energy bills.
There is a bus strike as well in Wakefield, so that's going to be affecting people there. But just finally, I wanted to ask about, is there a danger that there could be more strikes to come and a general strike, as it were, with lots of union members thinking this is the time to do so. We're unhappy.
What we are seeing are some ballots on issues like fire and rehire, 0 hours contracts, job cuts, and of course pay is a common thread, because right across the workforce we're seeing workers struggling. Union leaders don't call strikes, it's ordinary members who have to vote. And what we are seeing is that people are voting when it gets to that point in very strong numbers.
Frances O'Grady, thank you very much.
Thank you.